Good evening. Hope everybody's had a nice day. Good to see um, our travelers back with us. Um, and Had a good afternoon. Got some rain. Rain's always a good thing. Not good for my truck, but it's just good otherwise. So we'll be cleaning up the truck sometime this week. This evening, I thought we'd talk about attitudes. Title of the lesson is called Attitudes That Overcome. There's a constant struggle between good and evil, or that's how the Bible describes it. Going clear back to Job, or even clear back to the garden, we saw that there was a struggle between God and Satan. God representing everything that is good, and Satan representing all that is evil. And then there's the conflict or the struggle between the church and the world. And then there's the struggle that we're told about the flesh, versus the spirit, and how the flesh is in the world. And that's why we struggle with those things. But there's attitudes discussed in Romans chapter 12 about overcoming evil with good. We'll look at various verses through chapter 12, but our proof text comes from verse 21 of that chapter, where it says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." And so I think that, gives us an indicator that if we have a good attitude towards whatever might be evil or bad, then the Bible says we will be able to overcome it. So I want to examine these attitudes that we might have, or what we might call the right attitudes. What are the right attitudes that we should have? Obviously, we need to have the right attitude towards the world, and I think we all understand that. We've all had lessons, or heard lessons, or presented lessons about that conflict that we was talking about in our opening monologue, if you will. But Romans chapter 12, beginning there in verse 1, it says, "Appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." John, if we look over in 1 John chapter 2, John puts it this way. He says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world." And so, so we have, I guess we say staunch warnings, or there's emphasis put on our attitudes towards the world, and or worldliness, if you will. So obviously, or it should be clear, that we are to not have an attitude that is accepting of those things that are considered worldly, or that of worldliness. Worldliness is not merely just conforming to the customs and styles of society. If we examine or consider 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 30, we read over there, "And those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they are not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, And then a couple chapters later it says, For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as outside the law, not being outside the law, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. So obviously, Paul is pointing out here that, while he may have been preaching and teaching in the world, he was not conformed to the world. He may have gone into those areas of the world to reach those that were in the world, but he did not become part of the world. And so we need to be able to differentiate that, and then worldliness is blindly conforming to the world without regard to the will of God. Consider, again, Romans chapter 2, verse 12, which says, again, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of one's mind. So when we read and study the scriptures, we take on a likeness of God. We take on that being Christ-like. We read the precepts that says, thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that, and we apply them in our everyday lives. We can only do that if we actually know what those things that are written within the scriptures. If we never break open the Bible, if we never study it, if we never seek to learn what the will of God is, then how are we going to conform to his will and not be like, or be conformed to the to the will of the world? Obviously, we have to thus know what the Lord would have us to do. Behaving according to the curse of this world, consider Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1, short verse. It says, and you were dead in your trespasses and sins. So when we were in the world, when we were part of the world, we were spiritually dead. We were of that sinful nature. And we had to come out of that world in order to save ourselves. Adorning according to the curse of this world. The scriptures talks about, getting caught up in, how the vanity, how one looks, worried about what others may think of us. If we consider some of those verses, like 1 Corinthians 11, verse 6, it says, for if a wife will not cover her head, then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, let her head be covered. And then verses 14 and 15, considering that same thought, it says, does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For her hair is given to her for a covering. And so, again, just be an example, of that type, that, hair being something that we can be used to conform ourselves to the world or whatnot. Clothing, wearing clothing, standards of clothing seem to get shorter and shorter every year. What was once considered detestable, gross, and unacceptable is completely acceptable in society's eyes today. Can't even go to the mall without seeing, what the scriptures would consider to be naked people. I guess it's just kind of shameful, if you will. Clothing I have up here, clothing may not make man, but it does reflect his or her attitude. their attitude towards that world. Again, consider Proverbs chapter 7 and 10 says, "And behold, the woman meets you dressed as a prostitute, willy of the heart." Why would she dress as a prostitute? What would that mean, dressing like a prostitute? Did it mean that she adorned herself in clothing that would be modest, that would present her as a wholesome woman that would be fit for marriage, or did it mean constitute what we would think of today, a woman probably, scantily dressed, probably accentuating certain body parts in order to advertise or to make oneself appealing for the work that they're in. I think we know and understand that. I didn't put it in the slides, but Proverbs 7:14. I don't know why I put that in my notes. Anyways, and then James chapter 2 and verse 12. Of course, we know James chapter 2 is talking about I can't do 2 and 3 things at a time. About showing partiality. James chapter 2 verse 12 says, "So speak and so act as they who are to be judged under the law of liberty. For the judgment is without mercy to those who show no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment." Again, that whole section is talking about showing partiality or one's attitudes towards other people, and that they was conformed to the world and thinking, well, I want to give this rich man or this politically influential man a seat of honor, but this guy who is a leper, who is poor, a beggar, if you will, you sit off here, don't disgrace the church by being in here, just quietly sit back here in the back. That's not the attitude that the Lord would have us to have. We need to have the rightful attitude towards those things. And clothing reflects a godly character. There in 2 Timothy chapter 9 and verse 10, it says, "Likewise also women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, with modesty and self-control, not with braiding hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works." So again, we don't want to parade ourselves. We don't want, maybe we may not be scantily. Maybe we are dressed modestly, but, we feel that we must wear Gucci or Louis Vuitton or, very expensive attire, and that becomes, the centerpiece around, again, that those are all mindsets or attitudes of vanity, if you will. Those are not things that we should do. And again, those are just things that reflect an attitude towards worldliness versus an attitude towards spiritualness. And we should have a rightful attitude towards those things which are spiritual in nature. We should also have the right attitude towards ourselves. Not only do we not to have the right attitude towards the world, but we need to also reflect upon our attitude towards ourselves. Romans chapter 12, verse 3 says, For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. So, especially when we're good at something, it's pretty easy to get puffed up. It's pretty easy to say, well, I could do that better, or there's nobody better than me, or, et cetera and et cetera. I call it the me-isms. Me. Look at what I can do, that type of thing. That's not what the Lord would have us to do. A measure of self-respect is not wrong. We shouldn't think little of ourselves to the detriment of ourselves. That's not what's being said. But we shouldn't be arrogant. We shouldn't have a haughty attitude, if you will. It is snobbery and conceit that is the problem. That again, thinking that one's better. Well, I don't want to have. I don't want to have the congregation over here because I don't want the neighbors to see those type of people around in this area, if you will. That type of attitude. Romans chapter 12, verse 16 in that chapter says, live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty. Be associated with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Associate with the lowly. So the whole spectrum, those that are considered the least to those that are considered the highest. We should esteem them all at the same level. But that's not what the world would have us to do. That's not the attitude, outside these walls, if you will. There's a hierarchy. There's a social status to be maintained, and we need to not get caught up into those things. That would be the wrong attitude. We also need to have the right attitude towards our service for the Lord. Willing to serve with all and within our ability. And Romans chapter 12, consider verses 4 through 8, where it says, for as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith; if service, in our serving; to the one who teaches, in his teaching; the one who exhorts, in his exhortation; the one who contributes in generosity; the one who leads with zeal; the one who does act of mercy with cheerfulness. So we all have different abilities. We all have different areas that we shine within, and we should use those abilities to the fullest extent possible in order to bring glory to the Lord. Not glory to ourselves, but glory unto the Lord. That would be the right attitude. We also need to have a willingness to serve cheerfully, not to serve begrudgingly, like, they're going to call me again to do this. Again, that's the wrong attitude. Or resting on our laurels. Well, I've done that in my day. It's time for somebody else to pick up that mantle. And that there might be some truth to that. The younger generation certainly needs to learn to step up and to do the things. But at the same time, we also, our work does not cease until our time has ended here upon this earth. So we should always have the rightful attitude in our service to the Lord. Verse 12 says, rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, and be constant in prayer. That's If we do those things, we will be doing well. We also have a willing to serve with dignity, not lagging behind with diligence. Verse 12 says, "Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord." One more time. Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. Again, if we're doing things begrudgingly, they're going to look at me to do another potluck. That's not the right attitude. Or, you know, I don't know another example. I know down in Georgia, we would like to print flyers, and we would like to go and distribute those in mailboxes and stuff. But when it came that day to distribute, everybody always had something to do on that Saturday morning. So it was usually the same 2 or 3 people always doing it, which, and that was, I guess, fine for those 2 or 3 individuals. And I certainly wouldn't pass judgment. It would be speculation. I'm sure, some of them had legitimate reasons, but it just seemed always it was the same. It was the same thing regardless of when it was. So, take that for what it is. But I'm just saying, if our attitude, if we have something legitimate, that's certainly, and we aren't to judge one another. If you say you have something, you have something. That's not for me to say otherwise. But I'm just saying, examine yourself. Is the attitude in you not wanting to participate in the service of the Lord, is it because you begrudgingly don't want to do it, or is it because you literally got a valid excuse or reason? If it's valid, then there's nothing wrong. But if you don't have the right attitude, maybe you need to find the right zeal, if you will, for the Lord. Whether it be in leading and ruling, some are gifted at leading and supervising. Some are very gifted at prayers. Brother Richard does an outstanding job at delivering far better than what I'm able to do, and I'm very appreciative of that. And just something that he's very gifted at, and that's great, and that's a wonderful thing. In distributing to the saints, consider there in verse 13, it says, "Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality." What was that last part? Seek to show hospitality? Seek it out. Look for it. Grab a hold of it. Don't shy away from it. Just something to consider. And et cetera, et cetera. We need to have our rightful attitude towards all those things. We need to have a rightful attitude towards our elders. They have been appointed to lead, to make decisions that affect the congregation. So therefore, we need to submit to those those in that position of that authority. Again, and then those who are gifted at the different various parts of the service. Maybe if you get called upon that, granted, we should call on other people, but at the same time, if you're very gifted at that, if you're very good at that, then why not, again, deliver that to the best of your ability and have that attitude that it's an honor in order to serve and to serve the Lord to the fullest of my ability. And we need to also have the right attitude towards one another. We need to have brotherly love and affection towards one another. Verses 9 and 10 says, "Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor." Now, it's not a competition. That's not what's being advocated there, but we should have an attitude that, I'm going I'm going to bring honor into the Lord just a little bit better than the last guy did. If we're all, if we're always striving to reflect better upon the Lord, to reflect better upon the church, reflect better in our service, not because we want pats on the back, but because it's simply our duty in order to do so. That's the right attitude. That's what we need to have. We need to honor giving preference to one another, not preference to myself, not me, myself, and I, but we need to have, showing preference towards my fellow brother. Verse 10 says, love one another with brotherly affection. Just that simple. I've always told you, it still sticks. It was just, I guess, etched into my brain one day, after church services, and maybe she didn't realize what she was saying, but there was a sister that just said, well, I can show brotherly love towards him, but that doesn't mean I have to like him. What kind of statement is, what kind of attitude is that? I was just dumbfounded and thinking, what? And that just stuck with me clear up until yet to this day. We need to make sure that that's not the case. And we certainly don't need to show partiality. We need to have impartiality. Granted, we gravitate towards people who are that are like-minded, that are kind of have shared interests, but sometimes we need to push ourselves outside those comfort zones and ensure that that we're being loving towards all brethren. That's again James chapter 2 verses, that whole section, I think 1 through 14 there is all about showing partiality. And that it's evil, and that it's something. Thankfully, I don't think we have that issue here, but there's places that obviously that do have that, and certainly prevalent outside in the world, but it's also prevalent within the Lord's church, and we always need to be on guard on that. We need to also be peaceful, not warring, not being always looking for an argument to stir up controversy or those type of things. Be kind. Hold your tongue. Hold your peace. Don't judge one another. And then we need to have the right attitude towards good and evil. The passage that we said, we need to abhor evil. We need to be repulsed by it. Not try to make excuses for it. Not try to figure out, well, how do I circumnavigate this here in order for me to kind of be able to do these things. Consider Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 20, where it says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. In the time of Isaiah, they kind of just had everything twisted and turned around and worship, adultery and just all kinds of things. We see what happened to Israel. They were put into captivity for the shame that they brought upon the Lord, for the wrongful attitudes, for the belligerent, disregard for his laws and regulations. That's a foreshadow for what is to happen to those who do the same thing in this age on the other side of judgment. If we don't live the rightful life, if we don't have the right attitude towards those things that we're to abstain from, then we're going to pay the ultimate price when we stand before the Lord. And I really don't think that's anywhere that any of us want to be. Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 15 reads, he who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both like an abomination to the Lord. One more time. Justifies the wicked, and who condemns the righteous is what? An abomination unto the Lord. Not a sinner, an abomination. We recognize, yeah, it's obvious a sin, but it's also an abomination. That means a harsher judgment to be had. Instead, we need to cling to what is good. Grab a hold of it. Verse 17 of our chapter 12 says, repay no evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in sight of all. I think, and we still have those feelings that when we've been wrong, that, well, I'm justified. I understand we want vengeance. I understand that we've been hurt. I understand we've probably been scarred. But remember, vengeance is the Lord's. We need to search our hearts and work our way through that. And just as Christ loved us, that he gave his life for us, we need to, surely if he was willing to do that, surely we can find in our hearts to forgive others for the wrongs that they do unto us. So again, cling to what is good. And verse 21 says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Pretty simple, huh? Simple in theory, simple in words, very hard in execution, very hard in application. Overcome evil with good. The Bible talks about, when we do good to those who do evil, we're heaping coals upon their head, That's the attitude that we need to have. Not an eye for an eye. Not a tooth for a tooth. The Beatitude says we are to love our enemies. Not only love one another, not only love all those other people, but actually love our enemies. That's a tall order, isn't it? Again, especially to somebody who's hurt you. I completely understand that, but at some point, we have to work ourselves through that and replace that hurt, replace that anger, and not allow. Granted, it's okay to be angry. But when it becomes resentment, when it becomes bitterness, that's when we've gone too far. And that's when it becomes a problem. That's when it gets labeled as sin. And so we need to be careful with that. Need to have the right attitude towards those things. And again, like I say, we need to have the right attitude towards our enemies. We need to bless them. We need to not take a vengeance, not have an attitude of a vengeance towards them. Leave the vengeance with the Lord. Verses 19 through 20 says, Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you heap burning coals on his head. Do not overcome evil, but overcome evil with good. Through, governments. That's why God instituted governments. We may not agree with our politicians, and some of them are heinous people, don't get me wrong. But I guess in some aspect you say they're also divinely appointed to those offices. And we see through, we've studied in the Bible study this morning, God used evil nations in order to persecute those who were evil. So, you know, I think we just need to have the right attitude towards those things. Vengeance is not ours to have. It's not for us to go out. In this world, it's for the civil authorities to execute that vengeance. And if that's not the case, then in final judgment, the Lord will have that vengeance. But it's not for us to seek out. I know we may want it. We may desire it. We may insist upon it. But in the end, we need to come to grips with it, and we just need to leave it in the Lord's hands. So those are some of the attitudes. Great chapter. I encourage you to go home tonight and sit down and read it in its full context, and then contemplate on it, dwell or meditate upon it, and how is this applicable to me? Am I guilty of some of these things that are being pointed out here? Obviously, the Christians in Rome were guilty of those things, or Paul wouldn't have put them in his letter. It would be good for us to reflect upon those things as well. Our attitude must not be, again, conform to this world. We must not have a worldly attitude. These attitudes that we looked at here tonight will overcome evil if we have that's what the Scripture says. We have the right attitude. If we have the good attitude, we're able to overcome that which is evil. And so that's what we have to do. We have to seek out to have those rightful attitudes that the Lord would have us to do. So the rhetorical question tonight might be is, what is your attitude tonight towards sin? And what I mean, James, I definitely don't like sin. Well, that's not what I'm asking. What's your attitude towards your sin? The sins that you commit, the things that you know that you're guilty of, what's your attitude towards those? Do you have an attitude like, well, I make mistakes, but, I was kind of justified in that. Do you make excuses for your sin? If that's the case, then you might want to re-examine your attitude. Again, are you searching out ways to justify those things that are sinful in nature? I don't know. You only know your situation, not me. But if you've had the wrong attitude and you've struggled with it, then why not manifest the right attitude tonight? Why not manifest by stepping forward and saying, you know what? I could use some help. Could you pray on my behalf? Like I say, we don't need to know the particulars. That's not what the invitation is about. The invitation is just an opportunity to say, you know what? I need help, and could you all help me by praying on my behalf? What a glorious thing that would be. That's the right attitude to have towards that sin. So if you're subject to that gospel call in any shape, form, or manner, why don't you come forward as we stand and sing the songs of been chosen?